Shall we now call upon our last speaker, Senator Francis Kiko Pangilinan, to give his closing speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaislyn, for that kind introduction. To Philip Benyon, our Vice President from the Liberal International. To Siripa Itavicien, our CALD Youth Chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, delegates, good evening. It is of interest to note that we are here in Iloilo. I say this because as we discuss this information, and many of you have perhaps it has been shared with you, that the last elections in the country, in the Philippines, this information played a very major role in the outcome of the results. But I'm happy to say that here in Iloilo, Vice President Lenny and myself, we won here in Iloilo. This information did not succeed here in Iloilo. And that is why it is actually interesting moving forward. If we are to learn from the lessons of our experience, what did Iloilo do? How did Iloilo combat disinformation and ensure the victory of the pink movement here? That is one takeaway I'd like to note. Also, Sir Graham Watson said that disinformation, lies have been around since time immemorial. I, for one, was victim of disinformation in my youth. I was second grade when martial law was declared here in the Philippines in 1972, when the dictator held absolute power, controlled newspapers, controlled television, controlled radios throughout the country. And from second grade until I reached my freshman year in college, I was bombarded by all the disinformation. And I actually believe them to be true. And so I go back. They say, if you want to know what the future or how to get or where we are to go for the future, in the future, let's look at the past. How did I rise above the disinformation and the brainwashing and eventually became a political activist 3 years before the fall of the dictator, became a student leader, and eventually saw the truth, saw through the lies. It starts with the personal. Every individual will have his or her share of his version of the truth. But moving away from being brainwashed and moving towards the truth is a very painful personal process that we all have to bear in mind as we work towards shattering the disinformation that has poisoned the minds of many. We had a full and fruitful day today. We hopefully now have the tools, some of the tools, to muster democratic forces to address disinformation. We also had a meaningful sharing of proposed laws, existing laws, and regulations that can be lobbied and adopted wherever we are in fighting false narratives. In our first plenary discussion today, we are reminded that education is the long game we must play if we envision a future that is sustainable, inclusive, and fair. We have had several notable suggestions, such as conducting a nationwide campaign in colleges and universities on the importance of reliable sources of information, combating fake news, and addressing disinformation. Some of them are already connecting with school administrators, teachers, and student organizations to find ways to improve education outcomes in our countries in general, and to address the problem of historical distortion, revisionism, negative revisionism, and fake news in particular. Sun Tzu said that knowing thy enemy is vital. And that is exactly what we did in the second plenary session. We drive down the disinformation superhighway, so to speak, by familiarizing ourselves with the physical and relational structures that comprise the web of lies and troll farms. Indeed, it is difficult to navigate around fake news and skewed data, especially when the state itself is propagating disinformation. Some suggestions from the second plenary session include the establishment of a funded and organized civil society group that will address fake news and disinformation. Among its goals could be to hold the social media platforms to account and compelling them to change the algorithms towards reliable sources of information, widen the scope and number of fact checkers to fight viral disinformation posts, and quick, catchy, and witty responses. I am reminded of the lessons drawn from the experience of Taiwan in their 2019 elections. Prior to COVID, researchers and analysts said that the Taiwan elections was probably the most, at that point, the most hotly contested disinformation campaign at that point. And how did they defeat disinformation? 3 Fs. Fast, fun, and fair. Fast meaning within 2 hours from the time that a disinformation dissemination of false information is being undertaken on the web, there must be a response. In other words, we cannot ignore when disinformation is being spread. Fast. Second, fair. Fair meaning we cannot become the monster we seek to defeat. We must stick to the truth, disseminate the truth, and it must be together with common allies with a common objective and the goal. Of course, in our case, the liberals and the Democrats. And finally, fun. That the response must have humor, must be light, and I think this was mentioned in the third forum, the third discussion on art. It must be because humor is disarming. Defenses are brought down when humor is involved. So fast, fun, and fair. That's the challenge that we have to look into and how we can address precisely disinformation. And so the third plenary session, a reminder for the so-called grim and determined among us. Art and humor connect. They open the heart of the audience, half winning the battle for truth. Some of you are probably aware that I am into farming. I have a vegetable farm in Tagaytay, 1.5 hours from Manila. And I have been farming for a good 10 years. And what we're doing here today is we are sowing seeds. What we did last May in the Philippines, we may not have achieved our desired goal of victory in the elections, but we were planting seeds. And as a farmer, I know, after sowing, you cannot rush harvests. In due time, a bountiful harvest shall be upon us. We will plod on mightily. Good evening to everyone, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Kiko, for closing this General Assembly in such a high note.